When I was young, growing up in Baltimore, one of our annual vacation destinations was Ocean City, Maryland. I'm sure many of you have been there. And one of the things that I remember was part of that time there is that every morning when you would walk up and down the boardwalk, you would see people working on these huge, elaborate sand sculptures. Because what would happen is each evening they would have a little contest and choose the most creative. And they were beautiful and just amazing, the detail. They would have Elvis and mermaids, dolphins jumping out of the water, Star Wars characters, and they were absolutely incredible to behold. And the people working on these things would work all day, hours and hours in the blistering sun, with everything from shovels to trowels to dental instruments to get that fine detail in there. And in the evening, people would gather around and look at these, and they would be judged, and there'd be ribbons and things given out. It was just amazing to see the artistry and the beauty in these sand sculptures. But then you would come back on the next morning early, and overnight what would happen is the sea breeze, and the moisture, and the tides would come in and begin to destroy the works. And all of that beauty that took so long to create was starting to melt by the next morning. It was faded and starting to wash away. And I've thought about that over the years. And you have to realize that the reason that happens is because what these sculptures are made of was flimsy and light and weak. It had no real foundation to it. It's what Jesus and Paul are talking about today, what we lay our foundations on, what we build our lives upon. In the gospel, Jesus gives us a very clear commandment. When he sends the disciples out into the world to preach the good news, he says this: bring nothing. Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals. Keep focused and greet no one on the road. Bring nothing. No money, no possessions, not even shoes. The most basic, expected, normal things you would think anyone with half a brain would bring on a journey. Jesus is saying you don't need it. What Jesus is telling his followers is don't rely on the things you usually depend on for safety and security. Trust in God alone. Rely on the Spirit, not the tangible things of this world. We look at our world and our society and we see people working so hard, day after day, week after week, year after year, to build their image, to build their brand, their base, to create a legacy so that they will be remembered, to indelibly imprint themselves on the minds of others so as not to be forgotten. All the while ignoring the teachings of Jesus, seemingly embodying the opposite of what he teaches. Building their lives on the sands of ego and wealth and empty relationships. And we are reminded as Christians, trust that what Jesus teaches is right and that it really does work. That the words of Jesus Christ can be trusted. Build your life on that. And everything else that you need will find its way to you. Because when you are in the most need, God's going to find you. When you are in the deepest need, God will provide. When you are most afraid, God will make a way. And then Jesus gives them, among all of his instructions, a seemingly random but very specific piece of guidance. Whenever you enter a house, stay there. Wherever you end up, remain in the same place. Don't go from house to house to house. Now, why would Jesus be that specific in his advice to his disciples? Jesus usually talks in much bigger terms, much broader teachings and instructions. Well, I think what Jesus is telling the disciples in this is simply God provides for you. And if you are about God's business, if you are seeking the Spirit in your life, then where you find yourself, even if it's not where you want to be, even if it's not where you expect to be, it may very well be exactly where God wants you to be. Because God doesn't make mistakes. God plants your feet in the fertile soil. It's up to us to make things grow. But we have to trust that. We have to trust that where God puts us, even though it may not seem it's where we want to be, that God is there. It's the message of Isaiah from the first reading. It's a message of hope. God is here. God will bring you to new places. God has good things in store for you. You see, it's good that we're made for. No matter where your life is now, don't forget to look for the gifts, the good and the beauty, because it is there. Because God puts it there every day. And even if you aren't exactly where you want to be or think you should be, keep living in gentleness and peace and forgiveness. Keep living in the Spirit regardless of what people say or do. Storms seem very intense when you're in the middle of them. But when you look back, they really don't last as long as you think they are. Probably the most, I don't know what word to use for it, unpleasant, challenging, difficult time in my life were the almost 3 years that I spent in St. Lucia. I actually didn't really refer to it by the time I left there in St. Lucia. I called it the Rock. I just wanted to get off the rock. It was not a really good time for me for many, many reasons. It was difficult. It wasn't really where I wanted to be. It was challenging day in and day out. And when I was in the midst of it, I kept thinking, when will this be over? When will this end? When does this finish? But now as I look back, what St. Lucia is at this point is a blip in my memory. That which seemed to be going on so long and would never end is now, at most, a memory that I think about for maybe 30 seconds. But as unpleasant as those 3 years were, now that I look back, I realize that I learned so much from them. I grew. And I see now why I was there, even though I couldn't see when I was in the middle of it. I see now that God and what God was teaching me in all of it. And much of what I learned I could only see after I had left, after I was looking back, after I had some distance. Because often in the pain we can't perceive God moving. And one of the things that I learned in my time in St. Lucia was this. Sometimes all we can do while we wait for God to work it out is just do what is good. Stay centered in peace. Trust that God is in the mess somewhere. Pay attention to what God is saying right now, in this second. Don't worry about tomorrow or next week, or even when the situation is going to end. Look at the God right in front of you. Because God is right in front of you. And that when it is the right time, it will fade. And eventually it will be a distant memory. But when you come out of that storm, there's new life. There's a beautiful story from the Islamic tradition about a man who was in prison. He was in prison for many, many years and didn't know when he was going to be released. And one day a friend sent him a gift and wrapped it up. And when he got the gift, he was hopeful. Maybe it's a key, maybe it's a saw, maybe it's a file, maybe it's a crowbar, something that I can use to escape from my prison. And when he opened the gift, what he realized is it was a prayer mat that Muslims use to pray 5 times a day. So he was disappointed. He was hoping for something that would help him escape. But he decided to use the prayer mat anyway. So for week after week, month after month, he prayed 5 times a day. And when he eventually one day realized, as he would bow down, the part of the mat where he would bow his head had a very strange pattern to it. And as he looked at it day after day as he prayed, he realized that it was a diagram of the lock on the cell in which he was being held. By noticing that, he was able to escape his prison. And I think it's a beautiful story because it reminds us that we may not be given exactly what we want. But if we stay faithful to God in prayer, we will realize that the answer to what we need is right in front of us. Now, towards the end of the gospel, the 70 come back after their mission out in the world. And they're all amazed at telling Jesus these fabulous stories about what they did. I see them gathering around him around a fire, telling him all of these incredible things they did. And Jesus just looking at them. What he tells them is this: I've given you authority over the power of the enemy, and nothing will hurt you. But don't rejoice in this. Rejoice that your names are written in heaven. You see, my sisters and brothers, it's not the things that we do that God cares about, but the spirit in which we do them. It's how we are growing in closeness to God that matters. The things that we do, I'm sure, are good. And I'm sure many of the things that we do are helpful to people. But in themselves, they are meaningless if they are not an expression of faith and love. See, it's not the heights that we achieve in what we do. It's not the number of people we help in a soup kitchen or a shelter or in clothing drives or food drives or mission trips. But it is the spirit that we do these things in that interests God. Faith and love must be the fuel and the foundation of what we do, or what we do has little meaning. Even the raising of our children. We can, as parents, raise good, happy, productive members of the world. Homeowners and parents who have done well for themselves. Good, honest people that we are proud of. Proud to say these are our children. And that's good and important. But what God asks is, how did you do it? Where was your heart and your spirit when you were raising your children? Did you do it in joy and in gratitude and peace and gentleness? Were we aware and present to our children when this was happening? Were we grateful for them? For the gift that they are, not just on their birthdays and on Christmas and when we look through a photo album, but every day. Did we see our children as entrusted to us as gift from God? That's what God looks at. The works of the 70 were good things and they helped people. But that isn't what Jesus was interested in when they returned. He seemed to completely ignore all the stories they were saying. He says instead, rejoice that your names are written in heaven. See, it's the life of the Spirit that Jesus is interested in. Faith and prayer and love and sacrifice and forgiveness. That's the foundation. Those beautiful and intricate sand sculptures that were washed away in a few hours. If we build our life on the things of this world and just pass through, not paying attention to the Spirit, that's what happens. They just fade, because the foundation of our life is built on sand. If we seek after the things of this world, which are passing and empty and quickly fading, then we'll receive some safety, and some peace, and some happiness that are equally as fading and passing. The foundation of this world is the same as those sad sculptures I saw as a child. Beautiful and impressive, but underneath weak and very close to falling apart. But if we seek God's Spirit, the answer that we're looking for, the peace that we crave so deeply, the healing we will need will come. But they will be real and solid and not an illusion. Amen.
Amen.